You ever wonder why political speeches all start to sound the same after a while? Different faces, different slogans, but somehow it all blends together. That's not an accident. That's people like me. We made it that way. I was part of the machine that shaped every word, every pause, every smile a candidate gave. Not because it was true, but because it polled well. It's strange, really. Most people still believe that elections are about vision, about values, about who you think will lead you best. But after 10 years in the game, I can tell you, it's theater. All of it. Carefully orchestrated illusions crafted by teams whose job isn't to tell the truth, it's to win. I didn't start out cynical. I was idealistic, bright-eyed, overworked, running on caffeine and the rush of being in the room. That phrase meant everything back then. Being in the room when decisions were made. When messaging was crafted. When the strategy took shape like smoke swirling into form. I thought we were doing something good. Something important. But the deeper I got, the more I saw the seams. And the more I realized how much we were counting on the public never noticing. See, the truth is campaigns don't really adapt to a candidate's beliefs. Candidates adapt to what we tell them people want to hear. We'd run focus groups, test phrases, study micro-reactions. We knew what color tie made suburban moms trust a man more. We knew how long a woman could speak forcefully before she was seen as shrill. We knew which phrases triggered patriotism, which ones triggered fear. And we used them over and over like psychological weapons in a war most voters didn't even know they were part of. I can't count the number of times I watched a candidate rehearse a line we wrote about integrity while cheating on their spouse or funneling money through back channels. Didn't matter. As long as the narrative stuck, we keep pushing it. The truth wasn't relevant. Only perception. And what scared me the most was how easy it was to move people. How simple it was to shape outrage or hope or fear with just the right set of words backed by a lighting team, a music cue, a swell of applause. We'd leak a line, let the press run with it, then pretend to respond to it like it wasn't our plan all along. Manufactured momentum. Emotional manipulation dressed up as leadership. I know how this sounds. Bitter. Self-righteous. Like I'm trying to wash my hands after years of playing dirty. But that's not why I'm telling this. I'm telling it because it works. Because right now, there's a speechwriter in a back room somewhere typing a line that will go viral next week. There's a strategist assembling a fake grassroots story for tomorrow's news cycle. There's a staffer like I once was, young, tired, and still believing that if they work hard enough, they can make the world better without realizing they're building the illusion that keeps people blind. And the voters? Most of them don't question it. They share the clips. They buy the merch. They fight online like it's their own identity at stake. Not realizing that their outrage, their loyalty, their attention, it's all part of the design. I remember the moment it really hit me. When I realized that most campaigns weren't about policy or leadership, they were about storyboarding human emotion. That was our real job. To make people feel like they were choosing a hero. Even if that hero didn't exist. So if you're watching someone on a debate stage and they pause just long enough to look humble after getting a tough question, just know someone like me trained them to do that. And if you think, wow, I really like this guy, something about him feels authentic, that's because we studied what authenticity looks like and we scripted it down to the breath. I know this probably sounds like I'm jaded beyond repair. But I wasn't always like this. I didn't set out to deceive anyone. I really believed in the mission until I started seeing what we'd become. And this is just the beginning. You haven't even heard the worst parts yet. I'll tell you what really goes on behind closed doors. What we bury, what we twist, and what we gamble with every single election cycle. Because if you still think politics is broken because of the wrong people in power, you haven't seen how deep the rot really goes. It started with an internship. That's how they get most of us. You're young, ambitious, convinced you're smarter than you are, but willing to prove yourself for free. I was a junior at a well-known university majoring in political science, minoring in caffeine and long nights. I thought I wanted to change the world. Or at the very least, be close to the people who did. When I got the offer, I remember pacing around my apartment like I just won the lottery. A mid-tier senator gearing up for a tight re-election campaign, big enough to matter, small enough to feel personal. That was the pitch. Be part of something real. They didn't pay, of course. Just offer experience. But back then, that was enough. The office was a cramped floor in a dated building just off K Street. Fluorescent lights buzzing. Carpet older than I was. The kind of place where the coffee pot never gets cleaned and the walls are covered with years of taped-up rally posters and slogans that all start to blur together after a while. Fighting for you. A new day. Stronger together. Change the name, change the state, they all feel like carbon copies. But I didn't care. I was just thrilled to be in the building. My first job was inbox triage, reading every single email that came through the campaign website. I thought it would be inspiring. People reaching out with real concerns. Stories of struggle. Hope. And yeah, some of them were like that. But most were rage-fueled rants, conspiracy theories, or bizarre demands. There were people who thought the senator was a reptile. One guy sent us a 6-page plan to replace Congress with a shadow council of veterans and alpha males. Another woman emailed every single day with pictures of her cats, just pictures, no message. By week 2, I realized no one was reading these but us interns. And no one ever would. Still, we were told to mark any high-urgency concerns for escalation. I remember flagging a message from a veteran struggling with benefits, thinking someone on the policy team would respond. They didn't. It got archived like the rest. We didn't follow up unless it was politically useful. Human suffering didn't matter unless it could be turned into a soundbite. But that wasn't what broke me. Not yet. At the time, I rationalized it. We were stretched thin. The system was inefficient. Maybe later, when we had more resources, we'd do better. That was always the excuse. What I didn't realize was how calculated the whole operation already was. I sat in on my first strategy meeting about 2 months in. It felt like being invited into the cockpit mid-flight. There was a pollster, a media consultant, the communications director, and the campaign manager, each armed with charts, numbers, projections. They weren't talking about values. They were talking about likability spreads, emotional resonance scores, target audience segmentation. One of them casually said, "We're losing suburban white women over 45. Let's soften the language around immigration this week, push family values harder." That was the moment the curtains started to lift. These weren't bad people, not exactly. They weren't villains. They were professionals. Experts in audience manipulation. They spoke in a kind of clinical shorthand, referring to voters not as people but as blocks, trends, pressure points. It wasn't "what do we believe?" It was "what plays well in the Midwest right now?" I remember watching our candidate get coached before a town hall, literally repeating lines we'd workshopped that morning. He'd mess up the phrasing and someone would jump in, reword it, test it on the staff, rework it again. Then he'd deliver it like it had just come to him in the shower. The audience clapped. We checked social media reaction. Adjusted accordingly for the next stop. I started learning fast. The rulebook wasn't written down, but it was clear. Authenticity is performative. Transparency is a liability. Policy is flexible. The narrative is everything. We were told never to use uncertain language in public-facing materials, might, maybe, possibly, because it created doubt. Better to speak in absolutes. Confidence wins elections even if it's unfounded. Another fun fact? We'd test email subject lines obsessively. Not to inform voters, but to manipulate them into clicking. Important update: got fewer opens than "please don't ignore this." Adding a sense of urgency, fake deadlines, ambiguous crises would boost engagement by up to 70%. I saw it with my own eyes. And don't even get me started on donation emails. That's a whole other machine. We were trained to simulate panic. We're falling behind. The opposition just raised $50,000 in 24 hours. Can you help us fight back? Didn't matter if we'd actually outraised them 3-1. The point wasn't honesty. It was conversion. If people believed we were in danger, they'd give more. So we kept them scared, kept them angry, kept them hitting that damn donate button. At some point, I realized we weren't running a campaign. We were running a psychological experiment with millions of people as unwitting subjects. And we were rewarded for the results. But back then, I still thought we were the good guys. That we were just doing what was necessary to win because the other side was worse. That's the myth everyone clings to. You justify the manipulation because you believe your side deserves the win more. It wasn't until years later that I understood both sides play the same game. And the people writing the rules? They're not the ones giving speeches. They're the ones like me. If you want to understand how political messaging works, you have to let go of the idea that it's about truth. It's not. It never has been. It's about narrative architecture. That's the phrase one of our senior strategists used. He came from marketing, not politics, and he used to say, "Voters don't think, they feel. So we don't give them facts. We give them stories they want to believe." We'd sit in long closed-door sessions with whiteboards and data sets, storyboarding emotional arcs like screenwriters. Hero, obstacle, triumph. Fear, betrayal, redemption. Not policy documents, plots. And every story had to fit inside a 30-second ad, a tweet, or a headline. If it couldn't be condensed into a soundbite, it wasn't useful. That's the first dirty secret. The truth is always too long. too complicated. So it gets cut, stripped down, rounded off, sanitized, until it fits neatly into the narrative we've decided to sell. I remember working a campaign where the candidate had changed his stance on criminal justice reform twice. Privately, he'd admitted he didn't know what he believed anymore. But we needed consistency. So we built a story around his personal evolution, leaned hard into a vague anecdote about a friend's son who had been wrongly arrested. It was compelling, emotional. Never mind that the story was mostly fiction. The press picked it up. Pundits called it a moving moment of vulnerability. Viewers cried. Twitter exploded. Mission accomplished. And that brings me to the second dirty secret. The media doesn't expose manipulation, they amplify it. We learned early on that journalists are easy to bait. You don't need to control the media, you just need to feed them something they can't resist. Conflict, drama, certainty. If you want coverage, you leak a half story on a Friday. Let speculation fill the gap over the weekend. By Monday, it's a headline. By Tuesday, it's a debate topic. And when your candidate finally addresses it, they're not reacting, they're executing a pre-planned response to a crisis we manufactured. It's not just the news cycle, it's a feedback loop. We inject the story, monitor reactions, then adapt our messaging in real time. Social media makes it easier. Every tweet is a metric. Every comment a data point. I worked with a digital strategist who used to run political meme pages before we hired him. He could craft a viral post from scratch, designed to trigger outrage on both sides, and watch it explode within hours. We'd never post it directly, of course. We'd feed it through proxies, independent accounts with plausible deniability. It's a playbook that works every single time. 1. Trigger emotion. 2. Stir outrage. 3. Offer a hero. 4. Collect donations. We'd watch our opponents fall for it too, getting baited into responses we wanted them to make. A specific phrase here, a misstep there. Then we'd cut it, reframe it, and flood the zone with clips out of context. By the time they corrected it, no one cared. The emotional damage was already done. Here's something else most people don't realize. We didn't just shape what people heard, we shaped what they remembered. There's research, plenty of it, on how repetition solidifies belief. Say something often enough, in simple enough terms, and people will not only believe it, they'll think they always did. So we'd test phrases in microdemographics until we found ones that stuck. Then we'd repeat them relentlessly. Job-killing regulations. Family values. Out-of-touch elites. Each one tested, refined, deployed. These weren't thoughts, they were products. I once sat in a meeting where we spent 3 hours debating whether to use working families or middle-class Americans. Same message, different emotional reaction. One tested better with Rust Belt voters. The other resonated more in the South. The candidate didn't care. He just wanted to know which one made the line land harder. That's what we gave him. And still, at that point, I believed we were on the right side. I told myself this is how the game is played. If we didn't do it, someone else would. Better us than them. I didn't realize how deep the rot went until we started shaping not just our message, but the opposition's too. We'd create fake accounts, burner profiles that sounded just real enough, stir up infighting in activist groups, leak misleading statistics, push stories that made opponents sound unstable, extreme, dangerous. Some were outright lies. Most were twisted versions of half-truths. Then we'd sit back and watch the chaos unfold. The media would report on the fracturing coalition. Voters would get confused, tune out, or shift to us out of fear. Either way, we won. I think that's when I really started to feel it, that cold, creeping awareness that this wasn't just strategy anymore. It was manipulation on a mass scale, and we were rewarded for it. If a tactic worked, no matter how dishonest, misleading, or ethically gray, it became standard practice. You could leak a fake story on Monday, deny it by Wednesday, and still collect donations off the outrage all week. There were no consequences. Only metrics. Clicks. Shares. Retweets. Wins. That's the third dirty secret in politics. The ends always justify the means because the means are never supposed to be seen. But we knew. The staffers. The comms team. The data analysts. The interns. We knew exactly what we were doing. And we kept doing it. Because the moment you admit it's all fake, you have to admit you're part of it. You don't wake up one day and decide to lie for a living. It happens in increments, inch by inch, email by email. A compromise here, a shortcut there. And before you realize it, you're not bending the truth anymore, you're shaping it. The first time I edited out a fact from a press release, I told myself it wasn't important. The statistic didn't support the message. That's how they worded it. Not that it was wrong. Just that it didn't support the message. The implication was clear, our job wasn't to inform. It was to persuade. And in persuasion, clarity matters more than accuracy. Over time, that logic gets easier to live with. Especially when you're surrounded by people who all think the same way. That's something no one tells you about campaign culture. It's not just fast-paced, it's insular. You don't go home at 5 p.m. You don't clock out. You live in that echo chamber. Everyone around you is working 12-hour days, running on energy drinks and adrenaline. Everyone's too exhausted to question anything. You get addicted to the pace. The urgency. Every day feels like a countdown to some manufactured crisis. A poll drop. A debate. A leak. A scandal, real or staged. There's no time to reflect, no space to ask why are we doing this? It's just what's next? What's urgent? What'll get us through this news cycle? And when you're in that rhythm, conscience becomes a luxury. I remember one campaign where we learned that our opponent had a daughter with a serious medical condition. One of the consultants floated the idea, just floated it, of framing his stance on healthcare as hypocritical. He wants to cut services while his own family benefits from the system. It was subtle. We wouldn't mention the child directly, just planned a story about his voting record next to a headline about pre-existing conditions. I remember how quiet the room got when that suggestion landed. Everyone looked at each other. No one wanted to say yes. But no one said no either. That's how this world works. Things don't happen because someone demands them. They happen because no one objects. In the end, we ran the story through a third-party blog. Nothing traceable. It caught on. He denied it. We expressed surprise and concern. The numbers shifted in our favor. And then we moved on. That's the thing about politics, you never sit with anything for long. You just keep moving. I used to think the people at the top, the ones whose names were on the billboards and buttons, were the ones really pulling the strings. But they're not. Not really. They're more like actors in a long-running show. Sometimes they believe the lines we feed them. Most of the time, they just want to say whatever will keep the audience clapping. The real power sits in rooms no one sees. In messaging teams. In opposition research. In digital strategy meetings held behind locked doors. I've watched a dozen narratives get born, tested, deployed, and go viral within 48 hours, all without a single journalist asking where they came from. One year, we built a narrative around kitchen table issues. It sounded wholesome, accessible, focused. But the entire concept came from a poll-tested phrase that resonated in a battleground district with high voter volatility. We crafted the speech, the town halls, even the stage design around it. Wooden table, warm lighting, fake windows. Every detail staged. Every word rehearsed. And the voters loved it. That's what always got me. The way people would cry during a stump speech we wrote in a Google Doc at 2 a.m. while half the team was delirious. The way they'd believe in a persona we built from scratch based on data. It wasn't real. But the hope was. The hope was always real. And that's what makes it so damn hard to walk away. Because even if the system is fake, the people you're trying to reach aren't. They're showing up, hoping to believe in something. They want someone to fight for them. Someone to see them. And if we're good enough at our jobs, they'll believe they've found that person even if we know they haven't. I started losing sleep around year 4. Not from stress, though there was plenty of that. But from something else. Guilt, maybe? Or maybe it was just the weight of pretending not to notice what we were doing. You start questioning things in the middle of the night. Would I still be doing this if the other side was better? What if we're just the better liars? What if we're not the good guys after all? I had a colleague, Alyssa, brilliant strategist, ran comms for 3 major campaigns. She once told me the hardest part is not believing your own bullshit. I laughed when she said it, but later it stuck with me. Because she wasn't wrong. You have to sell the narrative to yourself first. Otherwise, you can't do the job. You have to believe the framing. Believe that the edited clip tells the whole story. That the contradiction was just a strategic pivot. That the truth is flexible depending on who needs it. Eventually, the lines blur. You don't remember what your candidate actually believes. You stop caring. You just care that they hit the beats on time, smile when they should, and stay on message. That's another phrase we used constantly, stay on message. Like it was some sacred doctrine. It didn't matter if the message changed. Didn't matter if it contradicted last week's position. All that mattered was consistency. Predictability. Repetition. Because repetition wins elections. Not integrity. People think elections are lost on issues. They're not. They're lost on disruption of narrative. If your candidate can't hold the story together, can't project the same emotional beat over and over again, you lose. Doesn't matter how right you are. Doesn't matter if your opponent is corrupt. If you can't keep the emotional thread alive, it all falls apart. By now, I'd seen 4 candidates rise and fall. I'd written speeches that won debates and talking points that ended careers. I knew what it took to move the dial. And I also knew what it cost. I watched good people get steamrolled by bad timing. I watched dirty candidates become icons because they hit the right emotional note at the right moment. I watched voters beg for authenticity and reward whoever could fake it best. And still, I stayed. I told myself I was too far in. That maybe, just maybe, if I played it right, I could use the system to do some good. But the truth was simpler. I stayed because I didn't know how to walk away from something that made me feel powerful. There's a department most campaigns won't admit they have. Some call it research. Others say intelligence. We called it OPPO, short for opposition research. It was tucked away in a quiet office down the hall behind a door with no nameplate. Inside, it looked like any other workroom: coffee cups, laptops, clutter. But it wasn't like any other part of the campaign. It was colder, quieter, more focused. That's where reputations went to die. I didn't work there directly, not at first. But you always knew who did. They were the ones who didn't talk much, who never showed up for the public-facing events. Their job wasn't to build up our candidate, it was to take the other one apart, piece by piece. You'd be surprised what you can dig up with a name, a birth date, and a little time. Old tweets, traffic tickets, divorce records, business filings. If it was public, we had it. If it wasn't public, we found someone who had it. A disgruntled ex, a talkative neighbor, a pissed-off former employee with a folder full of receipts. And here's the dirty part: even when the dirt was weak, even when it was nothing, we knew how to spin it. There was one campaign I remember vividly. The opponent was clean. Too clean. We went over his background 6 different ways and couldn't find anything disqualifying. So we pivoted. We didn't try to uncover a scandal, we built the illusion of one. All it took was a 6-word headline. Sources question timeline of property deal. No detail. No accusation. Just suggestion. A question mark. We leaked it to a local blog run by a concerned citizen. Let it circulate for a day. Then we planted the follow-up: opponent dodges questions on real estate ethics. A third article quoted an anonymous source saying something felt off. It snowballed. He held a press conference to deny it, thinking he could squash it by being transparent. That just gave us more clips to edit. We cut his statements mid-sentence, stripped context, uploaded videos titled "Caught Lying," and let social media do the rest. Within a week, his polling dipped 8 points. The story never broke into mainstream media, but it didn't have to. The damage was done. Voters didn't remember the facts. They remembered the impression. That's what OPPO is really about. Not facts. Doubt. You plant a seed of uncertainty and people fill in the rest. You don't need to prove your opponent is corrupt, you just have to make people wonder if he is. And if you're clever, you never attach your fingerprints to anything. That's what third-party PACs are for. Independent blogs. Twitter bots. Shell accounts. We'd create fake advocacy pages, taxpayers for accountability, concerned parents of the district, and use them to amplify the attacks while keeping our candidate officially above it all. And while all this was happening, our candidate would be out front, shaking hands, smiling for cameras, giving speeches about raising the level of discourse. It's a performance. A balancing act. For every hopeful slogan printed on a poster, there's a whisper campaign running in the shadows. That's how modern elections work. The public sees the polish. We build the poison behind it. We even had a term for the threshold: we were always aiming for plausible deniability. It was the golden rule of every dark tactic. You could be aggressive. You could be vicious. Just don't leave a trace. Never send the email yourself. Never write down the plan. And always make sure the candidate can truthfully say, "I had no idea." Which, to be fair, sometimes they didn't. Not fully. Some of them knew what we were doing. Some preferred not to ask. But the results were the same. The machine moved forward either way. There was one moment that stayed with me. A young staffer, maybe 23, fresh out of college. She was tasked with scanning public records for any hint of controversy on an opponent's family. She found a lawsuit, 10 years old, small claims court, landlord dispute. Nothing illegal, just messy. Her manager skimmed the summary and said, "Good. Now let's see if we can turn this into a character issue." She paused. You could tell she was uncomfortable. "Isn't that kind of misleading?" she asked. Her manager didn't even look up from his screen. Just said, "Welcome to politics." That was it. She didn't push back. None of us did. Because we'd all heard the same message since day one: if you're not willing to go low, you don't belong here. And here's the thing, this stuff works because it's invisible. The public doesn't see the emails. They don't see the planning meetings. They just see the results. One candidate looks composed, the other looks shady. One sounds inspiring, the other sounds like he's hiding something. But behind every one of those moments, there's a team like ours. Running simulations. Testing lines. Shaping perceptions with surgical precision. We had data on everything. How many times a candidate could blink during an interview before seeming nervous? Which camera angles made someone look trustworthy? What fonts made people more likely to read a mailer? Every choice was strategic. Nothing was accidental. And slowly, that knowledge starts to change you. You stop hearing speeches the way normal people do. You hear cadence, tone, breath control. You watch the public react to emotional appeals you built, and it starts to feel like a game. A contest of influence. A sport. And that's where the danger creeps in. Because once it starts to feel like a game, you stop seeing the people who lose. The guy who didn't get elected because of a whisper campaign? He might have had real ideas. Real integrity. But he got in the way. So we cut him down. Politely. Strategically. Completely. I used to think the political system was broken. Now I think it's working exactly as designed. And that might be even worse. At some point, we stopped thinking about voters as people. They became profiles. Clusters. Data points. Your name didn't matter anymore, not your face, not your job, not even your political affiliation. What mattered was what your data said about you. We built our strategy around behavioral fingerprints. It wasn't just how you voted last time, it was what you bought, what you clicked, what you liked at 2 a.m. when you thought no one was watching. And we didn't even need to look for it. You gave it away every single day. We just knew how to catch it. See, most people think of campaigns as big speeches and televised debates. They don't see the quiet part, the digital war room. Rows of monitors, heat maps of swing counties, dashboards tracking real-time reactions to a candidate's smile, a phrase, a tweet. Behind the scenes, we weren't trying to win minds. We were trying to trigger emotions. It started with Facebook. Back when it was the wild west of data. You could pull friend networks, location check-ins, page likes, and interests, all tied to a real name. We'd upload voter lists into Facebook's ad platform, match profiles by email or phone number, and within hours we could build micro-audiences based on personality. You liked Shark Tank, owned a small business, and shared 3 posts about border security in the last year? Boom. You got ads about regulatory freedom and American-made prosperity. You followed astrology pages, posted about mental health, and signed a petition about reproductive rights? We hit you with soft-focus videos about healing the nation and trusted women's voices. It wasn't just ads. It was ecosystems. Entire content streams engineered to feel like you just stumbled across them. We'd create fake advocacy pages, dozens of them, with names like Moms for Clean Communities or Veterans for Truth. None of them were real organizations. Just shells. Content machines. Voter lures. And once you engaged, clicked, liked, shared, we had you. We knew your emotional palate. We tested messages on you the way advertisers test toothpaste flavors. One consultant explained it like this: we don't need to change minds. We just need to find the bruise and press it. That's exactly what we did. We used personality prediction models based on the Ocean Scale: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. You score high in neuroticism? We sent you fear-based messaging. High in openness? We hit you with stories of inclusion and transformation. It felt personal. Because it was. And it wasn't just Facebook. It was Google searches, Amazon purchase histories, Netflix watch habits, Spotify playlists, your GPS history from that app you forgot you downloaded 3 years ago. You ever wonder why, during an election year, ads suddenly feel creepily relevant? That's not coincidence. That's a system tracking your digital shadow and shaping content just for you. One time, we targeted an entire block of independent voters in Ohio with a fake local news article about increased crime using nothing but zip code level data and a geofenced ad buy. They saw it on their phones while waiting in line for coffee, scrolling without thinking. A week later, our internal polls showed a 10-point swing in that neighborhood toward our law and order candidate. That's how surgical it got. And it didn't stop with persuasion. We used data to suppress too. If our models said you were likely to vote against us but also less likely to show up if you felt disillusioned, we'd feed you just enough cynicism to nudge you into apathy. It wasn't illegal. Not technically. But it worked. We'd show you stories about both parties being corrupt. Remind you how nothing ever changes. Slide in comments on Reddit and Twitter about how they're all the same anyway. Sometimes we'd even feed both sides of the argument just to keep you in a fog of confusion long enough to make you stay home. That's the other truth. Not every campaign is trying to get your vote. Some are just trying to keep you from using it. And we were rewarded for this. Celebrated. Raised our glasses in low-lit bars after data wins. Turnout down 12% in target zone, cheers. It became normal. Cold. Efficient. A numbers game. I wish I could say I felt bad the first time I saw how easily we nudged someone off the fence. But honestly, I felt powerful. Like I had the controls to something no one else could see. That's the danger of working in this world. You start thinking of manipulation as strategy, of exploitation as insight, of winning as proof that you're smarter than everyone else. And slowly you forget that those data points were real people. That the woman we sent emotionally charged content to was already struggling with anxiety. That the man we scared into silence was already living paycheck to paycheck. That the teenager we radicalized through meme pages was just trying to feel like he belonged somewhere. We never saw their faces. Never heard their voices. Just metrics. Clicks. Impressions. Conversions. We used to joke that we were running simulations of democracy. But over time, it stopped being a joke. We weren't participating in a free marketplace of ideas. We were running a behavioral experiment at national scale. And the scariest part? It worked. There's a point where the job stops feeling clever. Where the strategy meetings don't feel like victories anymore, just rehearsals for damage control. Where even the best messaging can't drown out the consequences. I didn't notice the shift when it happened. But I felt it. Like something sour settling in my chest, slow and quiet. It started with a face. A woman. Probably late 50s. She showed up to a town hall we staged in a Midwestern swing county, one of those carefully curated events where the questions are screened, the lighting's perfect, the flags are perfectly symmetrical behind the podium. I was in the back of the room, headset on, watching the audience more than the candidate. That was part of my job, reading the room, spotting reactions, sending notes in real time. The woman stood up during the Q&A. You could tell she was nervous, voice shaking, hands clutching a paper with her question written down. She talked about losing her job at a manufacturing plant after 30 years. Said she couldn't afford her medication anymore. Her voice cracked when she mentioned her son who died from an overdose the year before. And then she asked the candidate, how do I know this time will be different? It was the kind of moment campaigns dream about. Raw. Human. Televised vulnerability. We trained the candidate for this. He stepped forward, softened his tone, told her he heard her pain. Used phrases we'd tested for emotional resonance, everyday struggles, working families, the forgotten. The audience clapped. She wiped her eyes. He promised change. And that night, we blasted the clip across every platform. Cut it into a 15-second Instagram reel. Ran it as a mid-roll ad on YouTube. Sent it in an email blast with the subject line, "This is why we fight." We even overlaid soft piano music to make it hit harder. Within 24 hours, it had over 2 million views. Donations spiked. Comments poured in. But what no one saw, what we never aired, was what happened after. When the cameras shut off, she stood awkwardly at the edge of the stage, waiting to speak with him. He gave her a pat on the shoulder, a quick thank you, and was ushered off stage by handlers. She was still holding the paper. No one spoke to her. She left through the side door, alone. I watched her go. And for the first time in years, I felt ashamed. Because she wasn't a story. She wasn't a data point. She wasn't a moment. She was a person who showed up hoping someone would finally tell her the truth. And we turned her into a clip. A tool. A conversion metric. It didn't end there. Over the next few months, I started noticing things I used to overlook. A volunteer who broke down after being told to scrub her social media for anything off-brand. A staffer who was let go because his partner posted something too political. A junior researcher who disappeared after flagging a discrepancy in the candidate's financial disclosures. No one said it out loud, but we all knew he asked the wrong question. We built our message around empathy, but behind the curtain we treated people as liabilities. And then came the moment I couldn't rationalize anymore. There was a push top-down to lean harder into a certain talking point about healthcare policy. We'd framed it as protecting choice and cutting red tape, but what it actually did was strip away specific state-level protections. Quietly. Technically. Most people wouldn't notice until it hit their wallets or their prescriptions. One of our policy aides, a guy named Mark, raised a concern in a closed-door meeting. Said the bill would directly hurt low-income seniors. Had numbers, charts, everything. He was polite about it. Thought maybe we could adjust the language, be more transparent. The next week, he was reassigned to internal outreach, which is code for political purgatory. No meetings. No access. Just a title and a desk by the printer. By the end of the quarter, he was gone. No explanation. We didn't talk about it. We never did. Because that's how the machine maintains itself, through silence. Through the quiet removal of anyone who remembers what this was supposed to be. And meanwhile, the campaign marched on. The emails got more urgent. The ads got more aggressive. We leaned into fear again. They're coming for your way of life. Don't let them win. Everything you care about is on the line. Same phrases, different colors, different fonts. We stopped correcting false narratives if they worked in our favor. Let them grow. Amplified them, even. I sat in one meeting where someone said, if we fact-check this, we'll kill the momentum. So we didn't. We let the lie breathe. And that's when I realized something that still sits with me. Something I haven't said out loud until now. We weren't just manipulating voters. We were manufacturing reality. Not reflecting public opinion, creating it. Not responding to fear, stoking it. Not telling people what to believe, making them feel like they believed it already. The world people thought they were living in, where good ideas rise, where votes are based on values, where candidates mean what they say, that world doesn't exist. We erased it. Replaced it with a cleaner, shinier version. One that fits in a 30-second ad and plays well on cable news. I wish I could say I didn't know what we were doing. But I did. We all did. We just told ourselves it was worth it. Because the other side was worse. Because the stakes were too high. Because we were building something bigger. But I kept thinking about that woman. The one with the paper in her hand. The one who waited for a moment that never came. And I started to wonder. How many people have we left behind like that? Used. Amplified. Forgotten. How many truths have we buried beneath the slogans? That's when the system started to crack for me. Not with a scandal. Not with a revelation. With the slow, sick feeling that maybe we weren't saving democracy. Maybe we were just dressing its corpse in campaign colors. The campaign was already in overdrive when it happened. We were a month out from the election. Polls tightening. Media buzzing. The kind of stretch where sleep becomes optional and everything starts to feel like a crisis. We were running 5 narratives simultaneously, each one tailored to a different voter bloc, each one competing for airtime, engagement, donations. It was chaos, but controlled chaos. Or at least that's what we told ourselves. I was heading comms by then. Full access. Full responsibility. I'd graduated from speechwriter to message manager, which meant nothing went out unless I signed off. Social posts, press statements, opposition research leaks, surrogates talking points, if it had our name on it, it went through me. That morning, I got a text from one of our digital guys. You're gonna want to see this. He sent a link to a video. Low production value. Just a guy in his 30s sitting in front of a webcam. Nervous, maybe sweating. Said he'd worked in a regional field office. Said he'd been asked to manipulate absentee ballot registrations in a way that skirted legality, just enough to be deniable, not enough to make headlines. He had screenshots, emails, voice recordings. Nothing explosive on its own. But together? It was a pattern. A quiet, deliberate pattern. And it traced directly back to our campaign. I felt it immediately, that tightening in my chest. Not panic. Not guilt. Just inevitability. Like seeing the edge of something you already knew was there but tried to avoid looking at. We were caught. Not publicly yet, but internally we knew what this meant. And the conversations started instantly. First came the damage assessment. How traceable is it? Who else knew? Can we discredit him? Then came the response strategy. Flood the zone. Change the subject. Push a new headline. Blame the platform. And then came the call I'll never forget. Senior advisor. Cool voice. No panic. He's not a whistleblower, he said. He's a disgruntled ex-staffer looking for attention. We need to frame it that way. I pushed back, lightly. He's got recordings. Internal emails. If this gets picked up, it's not going to look like a vendetta. There was a pause. Then we bury him before it does. I didn't answer right away. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. No urgency. No hesitation. Just process. Like discussing what kind of backdrop to use at a rally. Routine. Emotionless. We buried the story, of course. That's what we did. We flooded friendly outlets with distractions, pushed a fake outrage story about something our opponent supposedly said in a college thesis, ran it through fringe blogs, boosted it with ad dollars. It caught fire within hours. Trended by midnight. No one noticed the original video. Platforms downranked it for unverified claims. But it didn't feel like a win. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of what we'd done. That part was already familiar. What kept me awake was how easy it had become. How second nature. The fact that a man tried to speak the truth and we erased him like a typo. I looked him up. Found his LinkedIn. He'd worked 18-hour days in a field office we barely supported. Slept on a cot for weeks during a regional push. He believed in the cause. Believed in us. Until someone asked him to bend the rules. And when he said no, we cut him loose. Quietly. Efficiently. And when he spoke up, we destroyed his credibility. We'd always told ourselves the system was a necessary evil. That you had to get your hands dirty to win. That the other side would play dirtier. But this wasn't a strategy anymore. This was survival instinct. The kind you develop when you're too deep to climb out. I started seeing the machine for what it really was, not a tool for change, but a self-sustaining organism. One that consumes everyone inside it. The candidates. The staff. The voters. All of us moving parts in a performance none of us control. You start out believing in change. But if you're good, really good, you rise fast. And the higher you climb, the more you see that change isn't the point. Winning is. Retaining power. Shaping the story. Managing the narrative. Whatever change occurs along the way is incidental. I once believed policy was the engine of politics. I believed the debates mattered. The platforms. The details. But by then I knew better. Emotion is the engine. Fear is the fuel. And the machine doesn't care who gets run over. I remember watching our candidate at a rally the day after we buried the whistleblower. He was glowing. Smiling. Quoting our latest talking points with confidence. The crowd roared with every line. They waved signs we printed. Chanted slogans we crafted. Believed in a person we'd assembled like a product. And all I could think was, they have no idea. Not just about the buried story. Not just about the lies. But about the fact that the man they trusted wasn't leading anything. He was following a script. A script I helped write. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife a little deeper, I saw someone in the crowd holding a homemade sign. Messy letters, uneven spacing. It read. This time, I believe. I almost walked out then. Almost. But I didn't. Not yet. Because when you've spent years shaping other people's beliefs, it's hard to remember what yours even were. After the election, everything just stopped. That's the part no one prepares you for. The silence. The vacuum. One day you're checking polling data every 15 minutes. Running on no sleep and too much caffeine. Fielding calls from 3 different states before noon. And the next, your badge doesn't work, your inbox is frozen, and your phone stops ringing. The machine moves on. Finds a new cycle. A new candidate. A new staffer willing to grind themselves into the shape of a true believer. I stayed behind for a while, helping with transition messaging, tying up comms loose ends, drafting language we knew wouldn't be read. No one talks about that either, how most political statements aren't meant to be heard. They're meant to exist. To fill space. To maintain presence. By the end of the month, I was out. No farewell party. No thank you speech. Just a manila envelope with an NDA, a box of campaign merch, and the unspoken understanding that everything we did would stay buried. I moved back to DC briefly, tried to settle into contract work, consulting for advocacy groups, doing message alignment for think tanks. But it wasn't the same. Once you've seen how the sausage is made, you lose the taste for it. Even the smell of it. There were nights I couldn't sleep unless the TV was on. I needed the noise. Silence made it too easy to hear the echo of what we'd done. Not one big thing, just 1,000 little things. All the edits we made. The facts we softened. The stories we stole and rebranded. The people we used. It's hard to explain to people outside of it. When I tried, their eyes glazed over. Or they'd say, well, that's politics, right? As if that excused everything. That's the most dangerous idea we've normalized, that corruption is just how things work now. And that's when I realized we didn't just manipulate voters. We trained them to expect it, to tolerate it, to accept surface-level sincerity in place of substance, to cheer for the illusion because the truth felt too distant, Too complicated, too exhausting. We lowered the bar one narrative at a time. I still remember this memo we circulated early in the campaign. It was titled The Power of Repetition. One slide in particular stuck with me. It said, "Say it simply. Say it often. Say it everywhere. They'll believe it, not because it's true, but because it feels familiar." That line ran through my head for weeks after I left. Because we didn't just win with that formula, we built the formula. And now it lives in every campaign across the country. Different parties, same mechanics. The same playbook applied with slightly different language, slightly different colors. You can change the slogans. You can change the faces. But the machine stays the same. It wasn't until I left that I realized how many others like me had vanished too. Campaigns chew people up and scatter them across the country like ash. People who once believed, now quietly living in other industries. PR firms, crisis management, tech startups. A few in politics still, but not the same. You can see it in their eyes when you meet them, that look like they're trying not to remember something they helped build. One of them called me out of the blue a few months later. She said, "Do you ever feel like we burned something down and just kept walking?" I didn't answer right away, because yeah, I do. All the time. Looking back now, I think the scariest part isn't that the system is broken. It's that it functions perfectly, just not for the reasons people think. It's not designed to uplift truth. It's designed to manufacture belief. To move public sentiment like a tide, slow, powerful, and almost invisible when you're standing in the middle of it. Every step I took in that world felt justified at the time. That's how it traps you. You start small. Adjusting a line for clarity, rewording a position for impact, framing a fact in a way that protects the candidate. And before you realize it, you're managing entire realities, silencing whistleblowers, crafting lies that wear the mask of hope. I didn't set out to deceive anyone. None of us did. But the machine doesn't care what you set out to do. It only cares what you're willing to ignore to stay useful. And here's the truth that still haunts me. People deserve better. They deserve better than what we gave them. Better than what we sold them. Because they weren't dumb. They weren't gullible. They were tired. Tired of being lied to. Tired of promises that evaporated after Election Day. Tired of screaming into a system that only hears them when their story boosts polling. And we knew that. We knew. And we used it against them. I used to think we were shaping the future, that we were playing 4D chess in the name of progress. But now, I think we were just really good at making people believe they had a choice, when the game had already been decided. And that's the truth that I couldn't live with anymore. There's a moment, after you leave a campaign, when the noise fades and something else creeps in. Not silence exactly, but clarity. The kind that only comes when the spinning stops. You start replaying things you ignored before. The sound bites you rehearsed. The people you manipulated. The truths you left buried because the lie moved faster. I've spent a lot of nights thinking about those moments. About the faces that passed through our town halls and strategy decks. Real people whose pain we wrapped into slogans. Whose trust we used like currency. And I keep asking myself, what did we really build? Candidate 1. The machine did its job. But what did we actually leave behind? I want to say we were trying to make things better. I really do. But if I'm honest, I think most of us just wanted to win. We wanted to be the smartest people in the room. The ones pulling the strings. The architects of something powerful. And somewhere along the way, the voters, the people, became the backdrop. That's the part one can't shake. It wasn't just that we lied. It was that we decided what people were allowed to believe. And we did it with a smile. With music swells. With manufactured moments we knew would trend. And now, when I see a campaign ad, I don't feel inspired. I feel tired. Because I know what's behind the curtain. I helped sew it together. Stitch by stitch. So here I am. Not running. Not asking for forgiveness. Just telling you what I know. What I've seen. What you were never supposed to hear. Because I think you deserve better than this. You deserve to know how your reality is built. Who scripts your choices. Who decides what you fear. What you hope for. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us start asking questions, real questions, we can break the loop. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever listened to a candidate and felt something wasn't quite real, but couldn't explain why? Have you ever wondered why outrage always finds you right before an election? Or why both sides suddenly seem equally terrible, just when you're trying to make a decision? Do you really think all of that is coincidence? Because it's not. We built that feeling. We engineered it. Not with malice, just with metrics. Because it worked. Because it moved you. And because nobody told us to stop. But now I'm telling you, this is how it works. This is what they don't say. And if you're feeling angry, confused, betrayed, that's good. That means you're waking up. So talk to me. Have you ever worked in politics? Have you ever seen behind the curtain, even for a second? Have you ever felt like your vote didn't matter, not because you didn't care, but because someone made it feel meaningless? Leave a comment. Share your story. Because the more we say these things out loud, the harder they are to ignore. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there will realize they're not alone. We were never supposed to talk about this. But I'm done staying quiet. Thanks for listening. Now it's your turn.